Hi there, welcome to a unboxing of the Dead of Winter Crossroads game. Now this game is a really quite popular game at the moment due to it being featured on the tabletop episode on the Geek and Sundry channel. And since seeing that, I've decided I kind of really wanted this game, and I've played it a few times up till now, and it really is a really clever game. But I'm just going to quickly have a show you what's inside the box and kind of show you. This is an assembled box, so I have taken this out of the box already once, but I'll just show you everything that's inside the box when you get it. Now, all the little cardboard pieces will be attached into a little frame when you first buy it, but you will get everything that I've got in this. So you get quite a reasonable rulebook. It's not actually that thick compared to some kind of what I was expecting. It is about, including the last page, it's about 20 pages, although the last page is just an index. And quite a lot of that is just story-based things. So some of the last pages are all just background stories about the different main objectives you can get throughout the game, well, when you're playing the game. But this does tell you everything that you need to know in the game. Now, I do recommend reading this all quite thoroughly, because when I first started playing this, I did make a couple of little mistakes. The terms in the game they use for the person who plays it, or the people who play it, is a player, and they have players which control a survivor, or several survivors, usually 2 or 3, depending on how many people are actually playing the game. So, some of the cards will mention, like, you need this many items for this many survivors that are playing the game. And if you get those player and survivor numbers mixed up, you end up either making it easier or harder. And for the first couple of games, I found it almost impossible to get past a couple of rounds. And that was because one of the card types you get in the game are these ones, which are crisis cards. Now I'll just zoom in on this a bit so you can see a little bit better about what it says. There you go. So it says this is a crisis card which is called the Blizzard, and it requires fuel cards which equal the number of non-exiled players. Now, non-exiled just means the actual number of people still within the colony. You can, if you feel someone is a traitor, you can vote to exile them. But this just says the number of non-exiled players. And if you get that confused and think that's non-exiled survivors, like I did, that means every time you draw a crisis card, which is once per round, you will actually need to pick up, well, you'll need to collect, say you had 3 players, each of which had 2 survivors, you'd need 6 cards that are fuel cards instead of just 3. Now, it's not that difficult to get 3 fuel cards, but it is very difficult to get 6. And it's difficult to explain how that actually makes a difference. Because obviously without playing the game you don't know how hard it is to get cards. But that's the rulebook, and it is very comprehensive and it does explain things well. I just slightly made a bit of a mistake. Now, another thing it does have is lots of examples of things. So it has quite a lot of these kind of pictorial explanations of if you were attacking a zombie with this character, you roll these dice, and it's very kind of well explained. And it's also all full colour, so although the text itself is black, but you do get some red highlighty bits, and you also get some coloured cards, so you can identify what everything is really easily. But that's the kind of 20-page rulebook. Pop that to the side. Now the next piece is the main board. Now I say the main board because the main board is obviously this piece you're looking at. Just make sure I'm focused. There you go. So this is the main board, which is very small. If I put my hand on it or I put my phone on it, it's not very big at all. Nexus 5 phone, by the way. And this board is kind of the centre of the game, because that's where, over on this side, you'll have all your colony occupants that will stay here, unless they move out of the colony. Now this is like a pictorial representation of the colony, so this is like where all your people are living, obviously, in this building, which is apparently a warehouse, an industrial warehouse. It just says down here in very small text. You've also got these 6 kind of spaces where zombies can go, and each one of these kind of entrances is what they're called. has 3 spaces for zombies. Now, this is one thing you've got to keep on top on during the game. You've got to try and make sure that none of these get too many zombies on them. It's okay if they've got 1, possibly even 2 on each entrance, but if you get more than that, you're getting very, very risky, because if you get overrun, which is when you can no longer find a place to put a zombie on each entrance, you will actually need to kill off your survivors, because it's obviously as if you were hiding in your colony and you've got too many zombies trying to get in. If any of you watch Walking Dead or things like that, when you've got too many zombies coming in, it never really ends well, and usually someone ends up dying. So you've got to try and keep on top of all these entrances. So it's quite nice having these representational things there. Now I'll just get a couple of these zombie tokens out, and these are, I'll just focus in for you, these are just reasonably quite nicely made. They're very thick cardboard, and they're on these very kind of simple plastic bases. Now I do recommend leaving them in here. They aren't kind of, they will come out, however it does kind of indent. I'll just zoom in so I can show you this properly. They will indent this cardboard slightly, so if I can get the light to show it properly, you may be able to see there's kind of an indentation just in the middle of this piece of cardboard. So I do recommend just leaving them in there, and the box is actually perfectly well sized to be able to keep them stored nicely. But you can just slide those in, so if you really needed to make it small, you could slide these in and out. But you'd put all your zombies on here, and they fit nicely in these little circles. And during the game, you'll end up taking away and adding loads and loads of zombies throughout the whole game, because that's obviously what the game's about, is about surviving zombies in the winter. A couple of other things on this board is there's a couple of the different card stacks over here, and there's also this little kind of icon of the colony just to show you that this is the colony represented on this board. So the cards you can put on here are the main objective cards. There's also the waste pile and the crisis cards, and they're where cards are generically stored. There are a couple of other cards which aren't required to play the game but are optional, generally recommended. It does make it a better game. And those ones don't actually have a space, or they'll have a space on some of the other locations. Now this one I haven't mentioned, which is a crisis contribution. So as I mentioned earlier, some of the crisis cards all of the crisis cards require you to give certain items, and they are placed in this section face down, and at the end of the round you shuffle those and deal them out and turn them face up, and you will then find out whether you have actually successfully kind of avoided the crisis or not. And obviously that can reveal you've got a traitor if you end up having a card that isn't one of the required cards, and that then ends up reversing the effect of having all these cards added. So the waste pile is another interesting one, is that because actually only these two start with cards. The waste pile is a very interesting rule, I think, and it's in a way a bit annoying, but it makes a lot of sense. Every time you use anything that's kind of, you use an action on an item card, say it's a single-use piece of junk that allows you to re-roll a dice, you will have to place that card in here, and that then will gradually increase as you're using more and more items. And for every 10 cards that are in this waste pile, at the end of your round, so every time you move the round kind of counter down, after everyone's had their turns, you count up the cards in the waste pile, and if you've got more than 10, so you've got 10 to 19, you add, or you lower the morale by 1. And if you've got more than 20, for example, you then move it down 2, and if you've got more than 30, 3, and 40, 4. So it ends up becoming a big problem, because most games you'll start with a morale of about 5 or 6. Sometimes a little bit higher, sometimes a little bit lower, depending on whether you're playing any of the main objectives in hardcore or not. So the waste is quite an interesting rule. Now I've briefly mentioned these trackers, and these, eventually I'll get to them, you will have a little circular kind of marker that you can just put on top of whichever number you are on for morale and rounds. So the rounds at the start of the game usually starts at 5 or 6, and the morale's about the same, and as you go through the game and everyone's had one turn, you move the round tracker down, and every time you do anything that requires you to reduce morale, you can move that down. And when either of those gets to 0, that is it. The game is over. Now that's everything on the board except one thing. Now over in this corner you can see there's a little icon which has food supply, and that is where you put items of food when you've kind of got all the food pieces. So if you play a food card, you will get some items of food which you can put down here. And that is everything on this main board. So the next thing I'll show you are these cards, and these are a really, really useful part of the game. These are the player reference cards, and these tell you everything you can do throughout the game. So I'll just zoom in so you can get a bit of a better view of all the text on here. So now it tells you where you can put your group leader, so I'll just zoom out so you can see the whole thing actually. You can put your group leader character on the left of this, so this is just sat down on the table. You'd have your group leader, which is the kind of character you want to lead your group, and you also have your followers down on the bottom here, where it can just say followers down there. It's got a section down in the bottom left, which is unused action dice. So every turn, at the start of every round, all players at the same time roll their action dice, and they are the dice you'll use to perform certain actions. Once you've used one to perform an action, you move it over to the other side, so the bottom right, and put it in the used action dice section. So that's quite an interesting kind of way of doing things, because it means you could have a turn where you've got lots and lots to do, but it could mean you've got not very much that you can do. However, there are always things you can do. Some things like attacking and searching require quite high dice rolls generally, depending on your character. However, there's barricade, clean waste, and attract are all other things you can do, and they just require any dice. So even if you've rolled a 1 or several 1s, you can still put barricades down, and barricades basically prevent zombies, to put it simply. And you can clean waste, and that is the way of removing the waste throughout the game, is that you can just use a dice to clean out those waste cards, and you remove 3 waste normally. And there are also things that don't require an action dice, and it tells you everything you can do down there as well. So I'll just zoom in so you can read that a little bit better. So you can do all these other different actions, and there's also this kind of turn or round summary, and this just tells you at the start of every round you reveal the crisis for that round. Everyone rolls their action dice, and then the player turns start. And obviously, whoever's the first player, whoever at the start of the game is the first player, which is marked by this little sword symbol over here, or this dagger symbol. That person then takes their first turn, and they will then have options of doing all these different things. And they'll move their action dice over. Once they've decided that's it, that's over, and that's their turn done. Now, another thing it has on this is that it mentions these crossroads cards. So it just says here, player to your right must draw a crossroads card at the beginning of your turn. And crossroads cards are an interesting, but they're one of the optional cards. You can play it without these, however it does make it a little bit more interesting because it's got some story, and it also makes it a little bit more difficult sometimes because you get some really problematic crises you have to try and avoid. And these, the person to your right draws one, looks at it, sees whether it applies straight away. If it doesn't, they'll keep hold of that until the end of your turn. And if at any point you complete or you do the action it says that you need to do to activate that crossroads card, they just sit there and hold that. Once it's activated, they'll read it out and stop you doing what you're doing. And then you can solve the crossroad card, which are generally like story-based things. So it might say you've stumbled across some survivors. It could say that something else has happened. So it's interesting, and it can kind of make the game a bit more dynamic and interesting. Now you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those. So with that you can obviously have up to 5 players. Now the game rulebook says you can play this with 2, and it does modify the rules a little bit. So instead of drawing two characters at the beginning, you'll draw 3, and you also have a couple of different other things. So you have a couple more extra item cards at the start of the game, just because obviously if you've got more players you end up drawing more cards and more characters at the start of the game, so it can be beneficial in order to have a little bit of a boost when you're only playing with 2 people. I have read online that you can play this game with 2 people, or sorry, 1 person, and that I have never tried, but I will try and figure out and see if there is any like modified rule book for playing on your own. A lot of the rules will be very similar. Now the next thing I'll show you are all these, well, I suppose they're almost a card, they're a piece of card, but these are all the other locations. So there's a gas station, a hospital, library, school, grocery store, and a police station. And these are all other locations you can go to, so I'll just start with a police station for the moment. I'll just show you the whole thing. I'll turn it sideways just to kind of make it a bit bigger on the camera. So it has up the top the police station name. It also has a number 1, and that's just so this is the first location. You can go to any location whenever you want, obviously on your turn. However, you can the cards that you put on this are specific to the police station, and they do have a number 1 and they say police station on them. The police station have, or all the locations you'll notice, have these icons across the top. So if I just quickly show you all of these, you can kind of memorize them, or we'll just have a look, I suppose. And these show you what kind of items you're likely to find in them. Now, I think they all actually have very similar icons. Some of them don't have something, so the police station doesn't have any books, but the school and library do. Now, the ones closest to the left, I think, are the ones you're most likely to find. So in all of them, you're quite likely to find, well, you're very unlikely, but it is possible to find other survivors, which are these little kind of head symbols. A lot of places have food, and other things like tools are really common. Also medicine and things like food, fuel, tools, and some of them have weapons. So only these two have weapons. However, I do think some of the other places, like hospitals, can actually have weapons, I believe. Just very infrequent. I'm not sure on that one, so don't quote me. But again, I'll just show you one of them to start with. So you can see this police station. You're most likely to find weapons, fuel, tools, some food, and some people. So it's quite a good place to go because you can get really good weapons that can help you just destroy zombies really effectively. Now these 3 spaces are where you'd put your characters. So when you're playing the game, you might have this person, and you'd obviously put them on this place when they're moving there. These 4 spaces are the same, but for the zombies. So as zombies are added, you will add them to their kind of corresponding places. And again, as with the main board, if you fill these 4 spaces, it will overrun this location, and any people that are here basically will die off one by one, which is obviously a bit of a problem. Now at the bottom you've got this big kind of square here, and this is where the item cards will go. I'll get to the item cards in a bit, but I'll explain that they do go here. So each of these location kind of panels has its own individual pile of cards, obviously so you find the relevant items in them. Now along the right hand side of them, they have these 4 little icons. Now these are where you'd place a rummage icon or rummage piece. And this is when you're searching, you can actually rummage, which is just obviously making a bit of noise. You can try and have a better look behind some boxes or in a box or something like that. And that's just a kind of visual representation that you've rummaged. So if you want to find a different item than the one you've drawn, you can rummage and you place an icon down here. But at the end of the round, you add zombies, and for every rummage token, there's basically a 50-50 chance based on a dice roll as to whether that adds a zombie. So if you've done that 4 times, you could add 4 zombies here, but similarly you could also add 0 zombies. And they're all very different, well, slightly different. So some of these will have 3 person spaces and 4 zombies. Some of them will also have the same. Some of them may have 4 people spaces and 4 zombies. Some of them will have 3 and 3, 4 and 4, and then some, like this gas station, have 2 and 3. So they do hold different amounts of people and zombies. Now on to the kind of more interesting part of the game. So I'll just move quite a few of these bits out of the way so I can get to show you a few of the other things. Now this is the deck of cards, which I'll also get to in a minute. I'll just move this box out of the way a little bit so I can put the cards in there. Now these are all the different well, I call them characters, zombies and characters. On the left here, this is where I've kind of stored all my zombies, so they're just loose in here, but you can leave them in the stand and they all fit perfectly in the box. So if I kind of do it flat, they aren't sticking out the top at all. So you can store them all in this box really nicely. Now, something that I noticed, however I'm not that fussed about, is that there aren't actually that many different types of zombies. I think there are 3 possibly. There's only 3, I think, different types of zombies. Now this doesn't affect the game at all, but these are the 3 different types, and obviously it doesn't make a difference at all really, other than visuals. But you will notice that there's only 3. However, I think there's quite a lot. I think there's about 40 possibly zombies, which is quite good. There are additional zombie icons, which are these ones. They're just little cardboard pieces. and those can be used exactly the same as if you were using a zombie piece. There's no difference between the zombies, they're all identical, there's no boss zombies, they're just different looking zombie icons. Now the other thing that you will be noticing is that on the right here you have an awful lot of other interesting characters. Now this is one bit I was really pleased with, is they've got loads and loads of different characters. So this one I think is the student, and this guy has a really interesting perk which you will see if I have a look and find his character card somewhere. There are a lot of cards, so it may take me a while to find this. Here, so I'll get these character cards out, since that's kind of what I'm doing. And there's obviously a lot of these. There's all different characters, and they all have their corresponding icon. And there's even a little dog, because who doesn't want to play as a dog in this game? And the dog actually is quite an impressive character. So I'll just move so I can give you a little bit of a better look at these cards. And I'll get the focus in so you can see. Now they've got a lot of different characters. I'll just quickly have a look through them. If there's anything you're interested in, just ask me in the comments and I can tell you a little bit more about which players I like and something like that, if you are interested. Now there's some that are a bit awkward, some that are upside down, and there's some that are really quite useful. Now most of them, this one's one that I'll point out, is very good. When this guy attacks, he doesn't need to perform an exposure roll. Now that basically means every time he attacks, he doesn't have any risk at all of being injured by the zombie. So obviously if you're attacking a zombie, you are putting yourself at risk of being bitten or clawed to pieces, and it's kind of useful to not have to roll when you're attacking a zombie, because if you want to take out 4 zombies, you've got to roll 4 times to see whether you're going to get a wound. Now the wound dice is that red one you can see in the back. I'll show you the dice in a minute, and that has a really interesting kind of bit to the game. So basically there's a 50% chance you'll get no wound, but there's also a 50% chance you'll get 50% chance you will get some wound of some kind. Now that could just be a generic wound, but it could be something really quite bad like a bite, in which case you are dead unless you can try and spread it. Now there's quite a lot of these cards. I'm not sure how many. I'll probably put in the description a big list of how many cards there are, but there are a lot of them, and they're all represented, as I said, with all these icons, and they're all completely like full colour characters that are all nicely kind of designed, and I'll try and see if I can zoom in and show you them much better. So they're all really nice art kind of designs, proper full colour on both sides, and they have the same plastic stands again. Now one thing that I did think was a bit annoying is some of them have these really big bases, well, really big card pieces, and obviously if you get one that's like that and one like that, they're a bit awkward for spacing if you had to have them next to each other. So that's one thing that kind of was a bit weird, but not much of a problem. And I'll just show you the backs of these cards. So these are the character cards, and these are the backs, so they're all the same. And you would just shuffle these at the start of the game, and then you draw, I think, 2 per player in a normal game. But if you're playing a 2-player game, you'd draw 3. You draw 4 actually. In all situations, you'd draw 4. However, out of those, you would look at those, and you would only pick 2 of them in a 3, 4, or 5-player game. However, if you're playing a 2-player game, you'd keep 3 of them. So I might want to pick the accountant, but I prefer to have the waitress and the fireman, but I don't really want the farmer, because the farmer just gets to search the grocery store and keep an extra card when he searches. But something like the waitress is whenever you're performing a search, you can look at 3 additional cards when you rummage. Sorry, that's not even a rummage, that's really impressive. Whenever you perform a search, you may look at 3 additional cards, which means you draw 4 and choose the one you want. So that's really quite a powerful card. So those are all the kind of icons in the game for the zombies and the people. I will just now show you, or move to show you, the different dice and also all the different pieces you get that you use during the game. So these are all the different dice, and there's also a couple of pieces that you use here that aren't dice, but they aren't something you'd use regularly. This is the first player token, so it just looks like a little dagger. There you go. And this you pass every round to the next player. So I think you pass it possibly to your left or possibly to your right. I'm not exactly sure, but obviously when you get the game you can look into the rules and find it out. This is the exposure dice. So this is a 12-sided dice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes. So this is a 12-sided dice. Now some of the sides are completely blank, and that just means you don't take a wound. So when you roll this, you may get a wound, you may not. Now there's a 50-50 chance of getting a wound. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm just putting my fingers on all the pieces that are covered. There's 6 blanks. So there's a 60% or 50% chance you will not take any wound whatsoever. However, I'm just moving it around so you can get a bit of a visual representation of what the chances are of getting certain things. There are different chances of getting other things. So the first thing I'll start with are the generic wounds. Now this, if you get this, gives you a wound token, which is one of these red things. I'll just cover up the other ones. One of these red things, and this is just a wound. Most characters, when they get 3 of these, will then die. And if you've got 1, it doesn't affect you really in any way other than the decisions you might make. Obviously, if you're wounded, you probably don't want to try and risk getting another wound. But there are other things. So there are, I'll just zoom in and focus for you. There is this one, which is the frostbite token. Now this, when you take this, acts perfectly similarly to a wound. However, every round, at the beginning of every round, you add on an extra wound for every one of these. If you have 2 of these, you will add on 2 additional wound tokens. So it's very problematic if you don't heal it quickly. And I think there's a kind of there are two options for that. So that's a 1 in 6 chance or 2 in 12 chance that you will get a frostbite wound. Now the other one you can get is a bite icon, and that just looks like a tooth. So that is very, very problematic. It effectively kills your player immediately, unless you want to do a 50-50, a chance of spreading that wound. So what you do is, if you first get a bite, you then have to decide as the player, do you want to just die? And that just means basically you've been bitten, so you're infected with the zombie kind of plague. If you decide to roll this dice again though, if you get any form of wound, the bite spreads to another player. Now that means you are dead, and someone else is probably also dead. And that continues and continues until someone rolls, or decides to stop it, until someone rolls a no wound part of the dice. So there's a 50-50 chance basically of killing another player. And obviously if there's lots and lots of players in the colony and you end up rolling that and killing everyone, you can end up wiping out everyone. However, that could be quite useful because this game is a co-op with Defector. So if you are the betrayer in this game, you really could cause havoc by just spreading a bite wound throughout the whole colony. But that's a really interesting part of the game, is that you're sitting there thinking, oh god, I don't want that character to die, so I'll roll, but if I roll, someone else will probably end up dying, like they would in that case. Now, there are lots and lots of these generic blue and white dice. I'll just zoom in so you can see this much better. There you go. And these are just generic 6-sided D6, and they are just plain blue. They don't have any kind of interesting coloration. They are just white dots and blue. Now a couple of them have odd specs, which isn't much of a problem. And I'll just try and find one. I probably won't be able to find one now. And some of them actually have a bit of a dodgy colouring, but there's only a very kind of odd thing. It's just some of these have uneven paint. But they are just the action dice, and they're just used at the start of every turn. You probably have maybe 3 or 4 or sometimes more, and you roll those and you keep those on your little player reference sheet. Now these tokens, I'll just show you these. These are the things you use on the board, so I'll just get the board now. And I'll just focus on that. There you go. So this, you would have the red circle. You'll put on the relevant kind of number on this rounds tracker. So it's rounds at the top, and you'd obviously just, if you're on round 6, you'd have it there. When you went to the next round, you'd have it on 5, and so on and so on. And that's exactly the same with the morale. So you'd have this token on whatever morale you are, and obviously as it moves down, you can move that down. So that's quite a kind of convenient part of the game, is that it's kind of, you have to physically like move your tracker. There's no kind of other way of doing it. So a lot of this game is very fiddly. You've obviously got to deal with a lot of different icons, because you've got all of these, all of these, all of these, and you've got all the dice, you've got all the zombies. It gets a bit of a nightmare. So I'll move the dice out of the way, and I'll get to the next part of the game. So I'll just show you these ones, which I have mentioned briefly. These are the wound tokens, and on one side, if I just get an individual one out for you, on one side they have a generic wound, which is this red icon. I will just focus for you. They have this red icon, and on the other side they have this blue skull. So they've obviously got a normal wound, which is this kind of blood drop zombie face, or skull, and they've on the other side got this, which is the frostbite. So you've got quite a lot of those, and I hope no one would ever have to use all of them. There are quite a lot. I'll just spread it out so you can kind of see how many there are. Focus it as well. And yeah, you usually end up using a few of these. If you've got too many, obviously it's you being bad at the game, which is generally the case with everyone. It's a very difficult game to do well in. So the next icons are these ones, and these, I'll focus again, these are the barricade icons. So when you perform a barricade action, you put 1, or if your rules dictate 2, if you've got special circumstances, you can put these tokens down, and they will basically block an entrance. When a zombie can only be placed where there's a barricade, or has to be placed where there's a barricade, you, instead of placing the zombie, just remove the barricade. So it's basically a zombie blocker. Now I've also mentioned this other piece, and this is fairly self-descriptive. This has a little ear icon, and this is the rummage icon, or kind of noise token. But when you rummage, you put down one of these tokens, and obviously you put it on the relevant part of this board. So you'll be tracking how many times this has been rummaged, and at the end of every turn you remove those, so you kind of keep track of how many pieces you've kind of got through. Now, I've also mentioned these zombie tokens, and there's quite a lot of those zombie tokens. And the other one that's also in this packet is this kind of person silhouette. Now this is the helpless survivor icon. Now helpless survivors, I think, are one of the most problematic parts of the game. Whenever you want to try and do whenever you're looking after your colony in order to provide food, you have to bear them in mind. However, they provide absolutely no benefit to you whatsoever. So when you end up getting some of those helpless survivor tokens, you're really, really in trouble, because it becomes more of a hassle to look after them all. Now the other icon I've got in this is the food icon. Now, get focus for you. This is zombie free beans, and they are all the same icon. So there's lots and lots of them in here. However, the other thing you may notice is there's also this empty can. Now this is a starvation token, so whenever you cannot provide food for your people, you put one of these starvation tokens in, and these basically will reduce morale and make people a bit angry that you've not provided enough food for everyone. So obviously people are going to get miffed and hungry and starved, and that's obviously not very good for them. So I'm just going to quickly show you again the character cards. I'll just show you a bit more of the detail about the character cards, as I kind of brushed over what they are, but I haven't actually shown you much about them. So I'll just get the focus right in for you, and I'll show you what they have. So at the top they'll have their name, so all of them have their own kind of actual name, and they then have their role, which is generally kind of a job before they were in the apocalypse. So this person is a farmer, And top right, they have in this kind of red ring, they have a number. Now this varies from 16, well 12, 30, 64, it goes high and low and varies between everyone. I think the highest I've seen is 66 maybe, which I think is the governor, I believe. Well no, here's the mayor, which is I think 68, which is the highest I've seen. But that's the 12. Now that number is their leadership value, or kind of initiative, I suppose you could call it. Now, whenever you are killing someone off, you generally kill off the person with the lowest value next. So if you've got a bite wound, the person that's got the lowest initiative or the lowest leadership is the next one to suffer a bite wound, and they will then roll the bite wound token, or the exposure thing. Sorry. Below that is this kind of icon that's got like a little explosion, and then next to that is a 3+. Now that means they attack for a 3+. So the little explosion icon is the symbol for attack, and the 3+ means that's what they need on a dice roll in order to do that. However, that is not, you need to roll that on demand. You roll your action dice all in one go, and at the start of your turn you can decide what to do with those dice. So if you had a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for example, you might use the 3+ in order to attack. And this one below is the search, so if you're searching you use a 3+ as well, and that varies. So some people, like this person is a pirate, they use a 1+ to attack, but they need a 4+ to search, and it varies. Some people are really high, some people are really bad. Some people, like the dog, are really quite impressive. They get 2/2, which is really good. And that varies depending on what your character is. So some people that might be like a soldier obviously will attack much better than someone who's a teacher, for example. Now there's a big full kind of sized picture, and at the bottom there is this text which just shows you or tells you what their perk is. So this person, which is the farmer, when they are at the grocery store, once per round they can perform a search at the grocery store and look at and keep an additional card. So that means they can look at 2 item cards, which I will just now show you. So I'll get to the starter items. Now there are different types of items depending on which location the item is from, but I'll start with the starter items. Now these are the items you will deal out at the beginning of the game, in different numbers depending on how many people are playing the game, and they can be various things. So you could have medicine, food, fuel, junk, which allows you to re-roll a dice, fuel, medicine, fuel, medicine, fuel, food, junk, food, junk, petrol, medicine, food, medicine. Now I'll just tell you a little bit about each of these cards. So the food I'll start with. Now this is actually, I just called it a food, is actually a food 1. It's fairly easy to see that now. And when you add this to the waste pile, you add 1 food token to the food supply. Now the food tokens, I'll just get them, are these things. And these you will add onto the food supply part of the board every turn, and you'll need to have enough tokens to basically feed everyone. Now you need 1 food token for 2 people, and well, for 2 character survivors, whatever they're called. And this is a food 1. Now if you go to the grocery store, I won't show you it now, but I'll just explain it. You can get food 2s and also food 3s, and I've never seen a food 4, but they may exist. And that means when you get rid of this card, so you add this to the waste pile, that gives you 1 food. But if you had a food 3, you would discard that 1 card, and you would get 3 food added to the food supply. So it's really quite useful to get better food supply, otherwise you're adding lots and lots of waste. So if you want 3 food, you've got 3 items of waste. But say you needed even more food than that, you've then got 6 items of waste just for 6 food, and that can build up very quickly. So this food, although it's good, is actually sometimes bad to use if you can help it. So you generally want to use the kind of more difficult to obtain food items if you can. I've mentioned the junk. This allows you to re-roll an unused action dice. So not one you've used already. Every round you roll the dice, and if you've say got a 1, but you cannot use a 1 for anything you want to do, you could still build a barricade, or you could empty the waste pile a little bit. The junk, if you use it, allows you to re-roll that. So you could re-roll a 1 and you might end up getting a 2 or a 3 or anything else. So the junk's quite useful, and sometimes that's obviously used in things like Crisis. So all of these cards have little icons. So if I show you the food again, it has a little food symbol up here, and you need one card that has one food icon counts as one item for your Crisis. If it's a food 2, so it says food 2, it will still only have one icon, and therefore you only need, well, you still need the same number of cards. Even if it's a food 2, it still counts for the Crisis as a food 1. It doesn't add extra food in to the Crisis. So it's something to bear in mind, is that you want to keep the food 2s and 3s for your food provision, but you want to use your low value foods in order to satisfy the need of the Crisis. So I've mentioned junk. I think I didn't mention these two. Fuel is very, very useful. It allows you to move a survivor, or you play this card when you move a survivor you control, and you don't roll for exposure. So every time you move a character between two locations, you have to roll the exposure dice, which is the red one with all the wounds on, and that could give you, obviously, a 50-50 chance of getting a wound. So fuel, if you have lots of it, can be really useful in order to not get wounds. Now, even if you do get a wound, if you get medicine or someone else has medicine, you can basically heal someone's wound. So with this card, you can remove any type of wound token from a survivor you control, or remove any type of wound from a survivor that shares a location with a survivor you control. So for example, if you were sharing the police station with someone else, you could heal them as long as they were in the police station and you were with this card. Now that's all the items that are in this pile. So I've mentioned junk, fuel, food, and medicine. Now there are a lot of different items. I will just show you the whole item pile, and just going through, there's walkie-talkies, outsiders, some pistol, shotgun, pistol, more food, a padlock, sniper rifles, pistols, more outsiders, spanners, mop bucket, which sounds not very good but is amazing, rotting flesh, which sounds a bit horrible. When spreading a bite effect, ignore this survivor. But there's food 3s, there's snowshoes, there's loads of different things, and there's, I think there must be hundreds of these item cards. It's a big deck of cards just for these items, and they're all for different locations. So at the bottom of these ones say police station. However, these starter items will obviously say starter item, and grocery store say grocery store, and so on and so on. I'll pop them over to the side. Now the next ones I'll show you are the Crisis cards. Now I've already mentioned this to you a little bit. Now Crisis card, when you, at the start of every round, you reveal one of these. So you've got a face down pile, and you will then look at one of these. And obviously look at the top one, and if you can satisfy that by the end of the round, great. If you can't, you're obviously going to lose 2 morale in that case. But they can do things like you can't move until the end of next round. They can do adding zombies, they can do loads of different things. Now these are the main objective cards. Now these have a lot of text on them, and these are just to explain the different parts of the game. Let's make sure I'm focused on that for you. There you go. Now it tells you the setup, and that is just what you need to set everything at when you start the game. So when you start this game, you have morale start at 6, round tracker at 6, and you add 18 zombies to the colony. Now that is a lot of zombies to the colony. That will absolutely fill the colony to the brim. So that's quite difficult, I think. But there's quite a few of these, and they all say at the bottom, at the start of the game, read section M06 on page 17. Now that at the end of the rulebook is all the kind of story-based parts, and I've kind of mentioned that to you before. Now if you turn one of these over, you then get to this kind of one that has the alert thing. Now this means you start with a lower morale but higher round tracker. And you still have the same number of zombies in this case, but it has harder victory conditions. So the victory conditions are there, which compare to the easier victory conditions of here, I think. Maybe not. They look like they're fairly similar number. But they do get more and more difficult on different ones, and they do actually have the time this game will probably take. So some of them are medium, long, short, and you can obviously just have a look through those, decide before the game which one you think you'd like to play, or you can just shuffle them and just randomly pick one out, which is obviously a bit more interesting because otherwise you end up picking easy ones rather than difficult ones. Now these cards are the exile cards. This one isn't, this is a crisis card, sorry. Now these are the exiled cards. Now when someone is exiled, so the group votes to exile them because they think they're a traitor, you obviously do what it says on the card. So this card says if you are not the betrayer and you've been exiled, reveal your secret objective to all players and remove it from the game. Your new secret objective is now the following. The main objective has been completed. You must have 5 food cards in your hand. If you are the betrayer, the first goal on your secret objective has changed to the following. The main objective has been completed. So it gives you a little bit more of a kind of interesting kind of game to kind of figure out. Obviously you've got a bit of a problem if you end up exiling someone that isn't the betrayer. You can play this game in a couple of different ways that make it really interesting. You can start the game without secret objective cards. So these are the secret objective cards, and at the start of your game you will draw these, and these will generally say you need a certain number of a certain type of card in your hand. However, there are others that are a bit different. So one requires at least 12 survivors on the board, one requires a weapon, a food, a petrol, and a medicine, which is quite nice because that's one of each. It's fairly simple, but there's lots and lots of these. Now I'll keep going and I'll get to these ones which say betrayal. Now this is the part of the game that I think is really quite interesting. You don't have to have betrayal cards in, you can just have these standard objective cards. However, if you add a betrayal card and say 10 normal objective cards, shuffle them and deal them out, that means there's a chance, but not necessarily a chance. Well, not necessarily it doesn't mean there will be a betrayer. If you're only playing with 3 people and you have 15 cards to choose from, you may get no betrayers, but you may get a betrayer. And that's the interesting bit, is that everyone can say, oh no, I'm not the betrayer, I just need some food. However, they could be lying. And that's one of the really interesting things, is that you don't know whether there's a bad person in the game. So if someone's playing badly in the game, as in just not very good at what they're doing, or they've got crap dice rolls, you might be thinking, they're a bit problematic, I might vote to exile them. And you can just get everyone to vote at the same time and say, I think this person's done something wrong. Shall we exile them? Yes. Get rid of them. And then they may end up not being the betrayer, but they might have just been not very good at the game. So that's a really, really interesting dynamic that makes this game really quite complicated, but really exciting and fun. Now, the last card I've got to show you, I know that I've kind of had a lot to show you, but obviously you've looked at this video knowing this is a quite complicated game. Now these cards are the Crossroads cards. They've obviously got the fairly simple Crossroad design, and they have on it a titly kind of bit to the card. They've also just got a bit of a description. So as I said, some of them will be instantaneous. It'll just say, like, if the player controls so-and-so character, but they can just say if they search a certain location or something along those lines. And these vary lots. You've got some that are really kind of straightforward to deal with, and some are just really nightmarish and will require you to basically just kill off people or add loads of zombies and horrible things like that. Because they could say something, I'm not sure on this, but they say horrible things such as like, you need to decide between killing off your character or making other characters take wounds. So you could either kill one character and then everyone's fine, or you can keep that character but everyone needs to take a wound, or everyone needs to roll the exposure dice. And obviously that's good because your character survives, but it could be really bad in the long run. But that's everything that comes with this game. Now, I will just quickly pause the video. Well, I'll restart the video in a second. Just showing you the kind of laid out board, just so you can have a little bit of a look. Now, in the description below, I will have a link if you want to watch a very kind of random video, which is a very kind of speedy time-lapse of me playing this game. And that's just taken with my GoPro I've recently got. And that's just going to be just so you can see what it looks like in a way to see the game. Now, hopefully, I'll be able to have kind of a tutorial kind of style video where I'll play around maybe too and see kind of if I can get the game kind of videoed in a way that's actually good, because it could be a bit difficult to kind of record this game because it's a very difficult, complex game. But I'll just put everything away so I can kind of tidy up. But thank you very much for watching. Please try and check out that video I mentioned in the description, see if you kind of want to watch that, because it's just a kind of couple minute long video just showing a kind of super quick, speedy time lapse of the game being played. But thank you very much for watching again, and I'll hopefully see you in another video and have a lovely day. Goodbye.